Dave Canales, offensive coordinator for Tampa Bay, came to them from Seattle. Last 2 seasons resurrected the careers of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, and now he is here to help Bryce Young navigate waters in the National Football League. Julian Council, Locked On Panthers podcast, joins us on the Adam Gold Show with his thoughts. I appreciate you on super quick notice jumping on for a couple of seconds. Your first reaction to the news?
Yeah, you're lucky I like you, Adam.
I can't believe you do. Yeah.
Dave Canales is a great hire. I have no idea if it will work. That's
right.
My first reaction. I do like this. It's interesting to me. There's a few ways to look at this. Dave Canales, as you just mentioned right there off the top, the work he's done with Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith over the last 2 seasons are inarguable. He's been outstanding in getting the best we've ever seen out of Geno Smith and some of the best football we've ever seen out of Baker Mayfield, who was awesome on Sunday in that loss against Detroit. And we know how things worked out with Baker here last year. Don't really think he was a scheme fit. You also look at the timing of when that trade was facilitated and having to go through a faux quarterback competition with Sam Darnold. That did not help him. But I do not believe Baker Mayfield is a long-term answer in Carolina. But Dave Canales did a really good job and has positioned Baker Mayfield to be the starting quarterback again next fall in Tampa Bay. He has the background with Pete Carroll, who was speaking glowingly about him at the Combine last year, saying that he's one of those up-and-coming coaches in the NFL. And while he's one of those up-and-coming coaches in the NFL, none of the other teams in the NFL who had openings were interested in speaking to Dave Canales. And the Panthers were the only team that interviewed him once, interviewed him twice. And that's not to say that they made the wrong decision. I find it interesting that they wouldn't at least wait till next week to speak to Todd Monken and Mike McDonald and try to make another run at Ben Johnson, who they were never going to get. Positivity, communicator, it's something that I keep hearing about Dave Canales. I'm going to dive in deeper. I have to get off the phone with you today. But I like it. I think it's good for Bryce Young to have someone who's worked with quarterbacks so closely. He worked with Russell Wilson for 3 seasons there in Seattle as well. I think this is a good hire for them as far as trying to help their young quarterback move forward. But again, I have no idea if it'll actually work out.
Which is, I think, exactly what I said before. Like, we really don't know. That's the and I would say this about any head coaching job. You just don't know how it's going to work out. You're at the mercy of a lot of different things that are out of your control as a head coach. The relationship between he and Dan Morgan, they were both with Seattle for a good chunk of the second decade here in the 2000s. So. They obviously have some familiarity. I'm going to guess at least being around each other, have some sort of a relationship. That probably helps as well.
Yeah, I would have imagined that after Dan Morgan was promoted to the president of football operations and general manager role early on Monday evening, that he had a significant influence in Dave Canales being the head coach now in Carolina. I want to say it had to have been Monday when Dave Canales was mentioned as someone who was going to interview for a second time, along with Raheem Morris and Jero Avero, the Panthers defensive coordinator, interviewed on Monday as well. But that's when really the steam was picking up that, okay, maybe Dave Canales can have an opportunity to be the head coach. And you immediately think with Dan Morgan, his 8 years he spent with Canales down in Seattle, the same case with Dan Quinn, having spent time with him, that those two potentially could go to the top of the list, but especially Canales being a young, offensive-minded head coach, which is that thing that everyone in the NFL is looking for, that he was going to ascend into that role. So I do think this is a good step as far as showing that maybe David Tepper isn't completely overruling people and running everything as far as the coaching search goes, and that he was willing to listen to Dan Morgan and bring in someone in Canales who could potentially be the best thing for your quarterback moving forward.
And the truth is that the just the data, what Canales did with Baker last year, and just in terms of the raw numbers, over 4,000 passing yards, almost 4,300 passing yards the year before, with career backup and at one time punching bag Geno Smith, and to create a bona fide NFL quarterback out of Geno late in his career, those types of things, those are what you put on your resume and ultimately get you jobs. I think it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. Real quick, Dan Morgan and his role, the general manager now. Why do you think ultimately Dan Morgan got the job?
I don't think it's a very attractive job. They don't have their number one overall pick, which I don't think they needed to use on a player. They needed to use to get more draft compensation. They only have 6 picks in this upcoming draft. You have contract situations with Brian Burns you got to figure out, Frankie Louvu, Derek Brown as far as his extension, and you don't have a ton of cap space. They only have about $30 million of cap space, and if you're not able to extend Brian Burns prior to the start of the new league year, then you have less than $10 million of cap space before you make any sort of other moves. And the fact you have to work with David Tepper, I don't find this to be the most attractive job. And It's interesting for Dan Morgan, who came here in May of 21, so after the draft. He's been here through the 14-37 that Scott Fitterer oversaw as a GM. He's been running the scouting department the last couple of seasons, and we've seen how the Panthers have built the worst roster in the NFL after this 2-15 season. So it is curious that he would be in this position. But you can't sit here and say he's not qualified. He spent all that time in Seattle, he was able to put his ego aside and be an intern in Seattle for all those years under John Snyder, working with Pete Carroll and Dan Quinn and Dave Canales and all the folks that came in and out of the organization. Went to Buffalo to work with Brandon Beane, and we know that Buffalo has built a really good organization. Brandon Beane was a guy here in Carolina that was groomed by Marty Herney and is certainly a much better GM than Marty Herney ever was. He has the bona fides, having spent time in those 2 locations and then here in Carolina. It's just curious that you would hire a search firm and then go down the hall to hire Dan Morgan to be your GM. But it shouldn't really be that surprising considering that he's been sitting in on the head coaching interviews, and clearly he has a pretty outsized influence on who now is the head coach here in Carolina, that being Dave Canales.
Julian Council, as we say goodbye, Locked On Panthers podcast. Search firms are frauds. They're all scams.
Let's get some money.
I would absolutely do it because they're forget about coaching, anything. A search firm, you need a supermarket check. I got your guy. I got your girl to be a supermarket checkout person. Like, we should have a search firm for everything. They're scams. It's awesome. What a great life to be.
One of the best grips going right now in America.
Hey, Julian Council, I appreciate your time, man. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
You got it.